So hi everyone. My name is Sergio Tirado. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonoma University of Barcelona. And actually, yeah, I have this presentation here in which I will go through the sort of the Spanish case based on my own experience, so contributing to the development of energy poverty statistics in Spain. And if we have time, I would like to show you a few slides also about what something which I think is important is this notion of hidden energy poverty. I hope you can follow me okay. I mean, I cannot see, I can only see the screen of my presentation. If there is anything, please just, Milinka or whoever, just give me a shout, I'll stop if something does not work properly, or if you have any question or comment that you want to do before I finish, okay? So what has happened is that energy poverty increasingly gained recognition in sort of public debates in Spain, especially after the 2008 crisis. And there are two factors that I think are important. One is the EU legislation and directives, especially this directive from the year 2009 that first spoke of vulnerable consumers. That was a very important step, sort of top-down motivation to the Spanish government for the recognition of energy poverty. But also there were a number of NGO reports, of which I was part of, as I'll tell you in a few minutes, that were filling informing discussions. And we saw that there was an increasing interest on energy poverty from the year 2012. In June 2013, there was the first parliamentary debate in the national parliament on energy, specifically on energy poverty, that was supported by the 2012 report. And from there on, energy poverty and energy affordability issues have entered party politics. And actually, it's right now it's quite a hot topic because of the very high electricity prices that we are seeing in wholesale markets in Spain and across Europe. So it's right now there's quite some discussion about energy affordability rather than energy poverty in Spain as a consequence of all that. The question here is whether this is all something that comes from governments or of any sort at any level, EU, national, regional, whatever, local, or if this is something in which citizens can be not just passive recipients of policy decision, but agents of change. So a bit of a timeline of the development of energy poverty indicators in Spain. Back then, this Barcelona-based NGO called Ecosurveys, I'm sure some of you know about them. They produced the first indicators for Spain and other EU countries in a FP6, I think, or 5 or 7 project, the EP project. And then in the year 2012, the Asociación de Ciencias Ambientales, the Spanish Environmental Science Association, of which I'm part of, where I've led 4 energy poverty indicator reports, we published every 2 years an update on indicators, and it was not only producing new indicators with new data, but also with new methodologies. Because I mean, over the past 10 years, there have been quite some developments in the methodologies for measuring energy poverty. Then in the year 2014, this think tank based in Madrid, Economics for Energy, they produced the first estimates of the incidence of energy poverty based on the new methodologies that the British government approved for official energy poverty statistics in England and Wales. Then in the year 2017, the EU Energy Poverty Observatory was launched. And that was quite an important moment for also for Spanish energy poverty metrics, because in the year 2019, the Spanish government launched the National Energy Poverty Strategy, the first of its kind in this country. And as part of that, they started calculating official energy poverty indicators, which are basically the four main headline indicators of the observatory. So they were basically following what the EPOV, the EU Energy Poverty Observatory, was saying, proposing as best practice. So based on my experience doing these reports for with the Spanish Environmental Science Association, back in 2012, we did something very simple, which is just calculating the number of households whose energy expenditure was above 10%. That's based on Brenda Boardman's first original proposal, and also reporting on the number of people unable to keep their home adequately warm. So something very, very simple. But then things got more sophisticated, and this is our latest report from the year 2018. I'm saying this is the latest because from the year 2019 onwards, the Spanish Ministry for the Ecological Transition, basically the Spanish government, started producing their own indicators, as I said, based on EPOV indicators. So we stopped doing these reports because there were already official indicators. So these are the main the main consensual indicators: inability to keep home adequately warm, arrears on utility bills. And what you can see here is that we did a bit of an analysis of an overlap between these different indicators, because our sense is that each indicator captures slightly different populations, vulnerable groups. And rather than choosing between one or another indicator, what we would probably need to do is to add up the numbers of the different indicators, of course, discounting all sorts of overlaps to avoid the double counting. And with this approach, we estimated that as of 2016, almost 7 million people were reported either inadequate temperatures at home in winter or arrears on utility bills, or both. So we think this is a more it is a better approach to measuring of the to estimating total incidence of energy poverty. And we did the same for these other two indicators, the hidden energy, the expenditure based. So twice the median is, according to twice the median indicator, a household is on energy poverty if it has to spend more than twice the median of the national median of the. I mean, we're talking here about the percentage of energy expenditure on household income. And the hidden energy poverty indicator, that's how it was called originally by the EU observatory, was when you have suspiciously low energy expenditures. So that's below the national median. As you can see, the overlap is minimum. Is very small in this case, because you have two very different sorts of households here. Households that need to spend a lot of their income on energy, or households that reduce very much their energy expenditure because of that's a different way of responding to this situation they're in. And so this is the stuff, what I'm telling you is the stuff that we were doing as Environmental Science Association in our reports. And then in 2019, you have the National Energy Poverty Strategy with reporting for the first time official energy poverty indicators. I'm sorry that this table is in Spanish, but basically this is the four headline indicators proposed by EPOV, by the EU Energy Poverty Observatory. So you have the 2M, the HEP, the hidden energy poverty, expenditure and income-based indicators, the top two, and then you have the two silk indicators, inability to keep home adequately warm and arrears on utility bills for the period 2016-2019. So this is quite step forward, because for the first time, having these indicators within the strategy means that the government, the state, was recognizing energy poverty as a problem of as a distinct problem of it on its own merit. Even if there are some issues with the official indicators. And yeah, as a bit of a curiosity, I can show you here. This is the print screen of the National Statistical Office aggregated results for these two indicators, and you can see, so this is the whole time series from 2004 to 2020. So this is the whole series for which these indicators are available, and what we've seen is an unprecedented increase in both indicators as a consequence of the pandemic. And in fact, the indicator arrears on utility bills, well, this is the highest percentage since the year 2004. And the other one is quite high as well. And definitely, it is a very significant increase of which we have known very recently when we had the results of the Silk survey for the year 2020, just a couple of months ago. But then the national strategy indicators were missing some aspects that we think are very important. Since the year 2016, the Spanish Silk has this item, which is asking respondents, participants in the survey, whether they have to effectively stop having access to one of its usual energy sources at home due to household financial difficulties. And this includes self-disconnections as well as forced disconnection following debts or late payment. As you can see on the left-hand side, this basically between 1% and 2% of the Spanish households reported this condition. This is, of course, a very small percentage, but considering Spanish population is 45 million people, you have nearly between 500,000 and 1 million people on the right-hand side that do not have the access to the energy supply guaranteed because of household financial difficulties. So this is an aspect of energy poverty that is seldom discussed. The lack of access, insecure access, disconnections, debt, all those issues are very important, but they're often missing in energy poverty statistics. Then we have we also looked into other stuff that are very relevant to national conditions and in the way the electricity supply market for domestic consumers is organized in Spain. This may be very different in other countries. So, but in Spain, the liberalization of the retail electricity supply for domestic consumers started in the year 2009. We have two types of supply contracts, electricity supply contracts for households. One is the regulated tariff, and the other one is what so-called free market contracts. Well, what has happened in this is that since the year 2009, where all contracts were regulated tariff contracts, it's around 50% of them. These blue lines have two different. There's a small difference between them. I mean, I wouldn't go into the detail, but basically, you have very significant decrease in regulated tariff contracts. And this is problematic from an energy poverty perspective because free market contracts are usually more expensive on a per kilowatt hour basis. But also they prevent, if you as a vulnerable household are on a free market contract, are not allowed to access to apply for a social electricity tariff, which is the most important policy at the national level. So you would have to change your contract into a regulated tariff contract, which is not always easy, especially if you are renting. You are not the owner of the supply contract. Well, that's something that we think that in Spanish context is a very important indicator as well. And then we highlighted and criticized the national strategy indicators because they totally forgot about energy prices. And even though there are structural energy efficiency, we all know that this is a key structural factor. Energy prices are super important in the short term for people who are struggling to pay the energy they need at home. And what again, sorry, this is a print screen of our Spanish report. But you can see here member states. To the left-hand side is electricity prices, right? On the right is natural gas prices. And what we say here is that Spain is among the top 3 member states in the EU in which electricity and gas prices have increased the most over the last, in the year, well, it's in the period 2008 to 2016. And again, we think this is a missing piece in the national strategy indicator that needs to be highlighted. And I'll briefly talk about the policy developments along these years, because there is a bit of a connection between the development of indicators and development of policies. So we have this very early electricity and electricity internal market and gas market internal market directives from the year 2009, in which vulnerable consumers are cited for the first time. And we have the first social electricity tariff in Spain from the year 2009. Then we have at the sub-national level Catalan Law 24 2015, which as I'll explain later, is very important because it introduced a new logic to prevent disconnections of vulnerable households. That is very, very important. Then 2017, we have the second social electricity tariff, a third an update of the criteria for the electricity tariff in 2018. We came from this winter package with this directive from the year 2019 that is restating the importance of protecting vulnerable consumers. And then this at the national level, these all leads to the approval, to the passing of the national energy poverty strategy. Very briefly, so we have 3 electricity tariffs for this since the year 2009, and what has basically changed is the sort of the complexity of this mechanism, support mechanism, and also the finesse of the mechanism. In the sense, in the beginning, it was just a 25% discount to pensioners, unemployed, and households with the maximum contracted power of 3 kilowatts. This again is important in the national context because we pay for capacity, so the number of appliances that you can have switched on at the same time in a household, in a dwelling. Then the second social electricity tariff introduced like 2-tier vulnerable consumer category. So you have the regular vulnerable consumer and the severely vulnerable that benefited from a 40% discount. And then instead, a higher level of protection as compared to a 25% discount of the regular vulnerable consumer. And then it was applying for the first time income-based eligibility criteria, which was something that had to be done. I mean, income is super important to define who is vulnerable or not. And then in the third social tariff, the third iteration, so there is an important element, which is this thermic social tariff for non-electricity energy expenses, which instead of a percentage of discount is a one-off payment of 25 to 124 euros per year, depending on where the dwelling is located. So climate, depending on climatic zone of the countries, official climatic zones defined for this mechanism. And also increase the social electricity tariff households benefited from a discount up to a number of kilowatt-hour per year for electricity, and this maximum subsidized consumption level was increased to a bit. I mean, this what you can see here is for a one-person household. If you this maximum subsidized consumption increases with the number of household members. About protection against disconnections, the legislation at the national level protects people who depend on the electricity supply to stay alive. So artificial aerators for people who cannot breathe properly. Doesn't matter whether they can pay or not, they cannot be disconnected from the supply according to this 2013 law of the electricity sector, but also the social electricity tariffs also protects from disconnections to very low income households, the so-called households consumers at risk of social exclusion. Under this, for a household with no children, this is below 5,000 euros of net income per year, which is a very, very low income. I mean, this is roughly 500 euros per year, which for the Spanish context is a very, 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 very low income. But then also we have this law I mentioned briefly before on the housing and energy poverty emergencies that it only applies to Catalonia. It was passed by the Catalan Parliament back in 2015, and this is a more sort of progressive and more. It offers a higher level of protection because it's not only about, it doesn't protect vulnerable households from disconnection from the supply, but also natural gas and water. And what is interesting is that it comes from people's legislative initiatives. A number of civil society organizations collected 100 citizen signatures, and they started this initiative that was later voted in the Catalan Parliament. So that's quite a milestone in the Spanish policy landscape when it comes to protection against disconnections. A few final, well, the national energy poverty strategy. Yeah, well, I've told about that. If anything, is that something that I forgot to mention earlier. So we now have the official indicators that are reported every year around October, November. The Ministry for the Ecological Transition publishes the new indicators for the previous year. So based on those official indicators, annual indicators, the government set itself the goal of reducing the incidence of energy poverty by 25% by 2024. This is very unlikely to happen, partially because of the pandemic and the very significant increase in energy poverty that I've shown you before. So what sort of outstanding issues do we have? There is some level of resistance to accept that energy poverty is something very different to other forms of material deprivation and monetary poverty, and of course they are very related issues. I mean, you cannot detach energy poverty from more general conditions of poverty. But what we are trying to say from the energy poverty research is that there are specific aspects of energy poverty that a more general poverty material deprivation framework does not capture properly. For instance, all sorts of the discussions around prices, contracts, energy efficiency of the housing stock, all that does not appear, is absent from the debate unless you talk specifically about energy poverty. And then there's something about energy poverty indicators very much focusing on thermal discomfort and energy affordability. But there are aspects that are very poorly captured by existing indicators, such as indebtedness to providers, disconnections, lack of regular access. So we are missing data numbers on those issues, and they're very important for people who are in those circumstances. And more towards speaking about policies, there is the issue of there is this prevalence of remedial measures. So it's about avoiding the worst impacts of energy poverty rather than changing things from the roots. I mean, there's some level of consensus about addressing the effects of energy poverty is enough, but in this Spanish context, at least, well, energy efficiency is very broadly recognized as a structural factor of energy poverty, poor energy efficiency of residential buildings. But then the whole political economy of the energy sector and how the electricity supply is organized, how prices are formed in wholesale markets, that's very, very complex. And it gets very political, and all that is it's not always recognized by all actors as a driving factor of energy poverty. And you would typically have energy utilities refusing to talk about these sort of issues as a factor of energy poverty, and much more referring to general poverty or low income as the main driving factors. And then policies also reflects all the complexities of sub-national governance. Again, this would depend on national context. But I mean, Spain is a fairly decentralized state, and then you have asymmetries in the level of protection of vulnerable consumers. And we see that, for instance, in protection against disconnections. Catalonia offers a higher level of protection against the rest of the territory. And well, this creates tensions that could be productive in the sense that the national legislation may be forced to increase levels of protection to ensure equality across all territories at the regional level within Spain. So this is what I wanted to tell you about the Spanish case. My experience with that. I wonder if there is time and interest to talk a bit about hidden energy poverty, which I think it may be important. I don't know what Million and others think about that.
Thank you for the presentation. And of course, if anybody has a question about hidden energy poverty, and if you're willing to share a few slides with us, that would also be great.
Yeah.
We'll have like 10 or 15 minutes for you, so. Okay, I think that you can start your presentation.
Okay, I'll go with the second one. Sorry, I hear you. It's a bit far. So, yeah.
Sorry, I will move closer to the speaker.
Thanks.
Yeah, so nobody has a question at this point, but we would really like to see your presentation on hidden energy poverty. And I think that there are some of us who are very interested in the topic. And you still have like 10-15 minutes if you can use this time for the presentation.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Now I got it much more clearly. Okay, so this is when I was getting ready to join you guys in your meeting, I remember that I prepared this presentation for it was a training school we did back in April for the Engager Cost Action, which is a network of energy poverty researchers and practitioners. And yeah, I think this is it could be quite relevant for the discussions you're having. So we go on speaking about indicators. If you Google energy or fuel poverty, you will typically get these sort of images, which are actually come from UK image banks. You have the typical vulnerable household. So it's elderly people who are cold at home or are struggling to pay their bills. And this is actually these are the three of the for EPOF headline indicators. So this is what we picture, how we picture energy poverty typically, and how we've done it for a long time and still do, right? But then since a few years, we're also speaking about energy poverty, understood as underconsumption, and we have actually the EU Observatory has this low absolute energy expenditure M divided by 2 indicator, which was originally labeled called hidden energy poverty, and this refers to a coping strategy which is typical of an energy poor households, which is voluntarily rationing the consumption of energy services. And this is a table from a paper from Hong Kong in 2020, basically showing that how these 5 interviewed households in Hong Kong, they were going to a shopping mall in the summer, so that they didn't have to switch on the air conditioning if they had. And a number of other water saving strategies to reduce their expenses. So this is what we understand that as hidden energy poverty. But what else can we mean by having hidden energy poverty? Well, it's also about experiences or dimensions that are not recognized in common or expert knowledge. For instance, there is this paper by Saska Petrova that speaks of university students in the UK in rented accommodation, living in very poor quality rented accommodation, living in fuel poverty, and they are not being recognized as a vulnerable population because they are young, they are university students, they are thought to have some sort of level of income. So, well, why should we care about them? Or what happens with prepayment, people on prepayment meters? In some countries like Hungary, I mean, they are seen as a household that is being protected from this connection, but is being on a prepayment meter. Does it mean that you are on energy poverty, or it is about you, or it means that you're protected by energy poverty? This gets again political. So there is no consensus, an easy consensus around that. Or water, which is required for the provision of domestic energy services, and still is not typically recognized under the energy poverty framework. What else can we mean by having energy poverty? Well, forms or experiences of energy poverty for which we lack data and indicators. So anything that has to do with solid fuels or district heating, which is very prevalent in Central Eastern Europe. Well, we have very little data about all that. What sort of data do we have to understand what means being in energy poverty if you're using solid fuels and you are collecting your firewood, as it happens in many rural areas in Eastern Europe, in Central Eastern Europe, or stuff that I was mentioning before, self-disconnections, informal, irregular connection. On this image on the right, you can see this large multifamily building in Badalona, nearby Barcelona. And you see, I'm not sure, I hope you see that some of the bit of this big, large building. Well, there was a fire in some of the apartments there, and this happened because it's a very complex issue of people living in this building, but without having a proper legal contract to the electricity supply, and faults in the construction of the building, of the electricity wiring. As a result, I mean, a couple of people died in January 2018, I think it was, because of this very complex housing and energy deprivation condition. And this is not stuff like that doesn't appear in indicators. But then we can also speak of energy poverty from the point of view of key actors such as municipalities, that are often at the forefront of the provision of support to vulnerable households. And based on the experience of the Energy Advisory Help Desk points in Barcelona, there are many people who do not approach local social services, but nevertheless, they may be struggling greatly to pay for the energy they need at home. Typically, this could be, for instance, a pensioner living alone in a home they own, so they are asset rich, but they have low income because they live on a small pension. These people would never go, for a number of reasons, to local social services. What they did in Barcelona, for instance, was this energy advisory help desk, nowhere is written poverty. So it's not an energy poverty help desk or anything like that. It's just it's an energy advisory help desk, so that they are able to attract population that would not identify themselves as poor in any case. And what happens? The picture to your right is the UN special report there, and on extreme poverty that came to Spain in a couple of years ago, and he was visiting these very poor settlements of transient migrant workers coming for a few months to work picking strawberries in southern Spain. So you have conditions. Well, there are all sorts of issues, but definitely energy poverty, the issues in those settlements that are not captured at all by energy poverty indicators. Of course, they are very, statistically speaking, they are very small, because this refers to a very small population as compared to the size of the whole country. But conditions are really difficult who live there. I'll skip this one. Or we have the case of Cañada Real in Madrid. So what you see, it's an informal settlement. On this photo, you can see the city of Madrid well, nicely lit in the background on the photo. And then you have this 16-kilometer informal settlement, a fraction of which was fully disconnected, has been fully without any access to the electricity since autumn last year. It could be long to tell you why this situation is like this, but it has to do with the fact that it's an informal settlement basically. So this is a urban street art action, which nos están apagando. This means they are switching us off. This is the sentences written in candles that people from the community put there to kind of denounce the conditions where they were living. So again, this, even though it's not a small, it's 4,000 people without proper access to electricity for almost a year. And this is practically absent from any sort of official statistics indicators. And again, as perhaps 4,000 people in a 45 million people country is a very small number, but the conditions are really difficult for people living in this informal settlement. So just a few final words about the importance of seeing indicators from a lived experience sort of perspective. So the idea that people experiencing conditions of energy poverty, being able to say, to define, to even participate in energy poverty measuring exercises could be very important. So it's not just researchers, ministries, whoever is outside, so non-affected people telling what energy poverty is. Perhaps there's space for people directly affected by this problem, telling us what energy poverty is. And from there, we could build indicators that perhaps could be different from what we have now. And as final remarks, it's important to remind that indicators are just schematic numerical representations of very complex reality, which is energy poverty. There are many ways in which energy poverty can be experienced, and indicators may actually bias or obscure our understanding of what energy poverty is. And then we need to typically household the scale at which we measure energy poverty, because that's the sampling unit of all those surveys, such as the household budget survey or the survey on income and living conditions, SILC, that we use to measure energy poverty. Well, there is stuff happening at the sub-household level. Gender and age mediate the experience of energy poverty, such as, I mean, women are, for instance, more often in charge of energy-intensive services at home. And this is very poorly reflected or not reflected at all in available indicators. Then, because some of these very unrecognized experiences of energy poverty affect already marginalized social groups, such as the Roma, so it's what we are saying here. Okay, it's important to make people aware of these hidden forms of energy poverty, but then we risk re-stigmatizing them. For instance, we say that the Roma are burning solid fuels of very poor quality. I mean, this may have implications on how the Roma are seen and perceived in society. And as a final word, the bit of a proposal, suggestion to move towards more democratic monitoring of energy poverty with participatory processes that come from bottom-up design of monitoring frameworks in which the lived experiences of those that are directly in energy poverty conditions tell us what energy poverty is for them and how this could change the way we measure them. Okay, thank you for your attention. I mean, I know it's been a few slides. I hope you found it interesting, and I'd be happy to discuss anything that you would like to discuss, any questions as well.
Thank you for both presentations. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, Branko has a question, but he needs to come closer to the microphone and speaker.
Hi, Sergio. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Branko. Yeah, I can hear you well.
Yeah. I have a question concerning you've said what the main argument is about putting an emphasis on energy poverty per se, and not talking about poverty in general. And you said that when we are doing research and exploring energy poverty, we can understand more about prices, market mechanisms, and so on concerning energy per se. But I was wondering, and I see that there is an advantage to it, but I see also that there is a lack of understanding poverty in general, because I know some of the researchers from the energy poverty field would claim that energy poverty is wider than the general poverty, which I think it's a misconception, because we know from the literature, if you think about that, poverty was usually being seen as either an individual characteristic or as something as a consequence of structure, of social structure. In that way, like, for instance, capitalism. We knew what are the main factors of poverty, like problems with jobs, with labor, with workforce, or if you're not employed, that there is a bigger possibility that it will increase your likelihood of being poor. Or for instance, high cost, or so you have like 10, 12 to maybe 15 various kinds of factors that we know from literature, and for the last 30 or 40 years. One of those is high cost. One of the problems with energy poverty, or the emphasis of energy poverty, is focused on high cost. And I'm asking all this because I have a sense that eventually we'll have now European politics and policy more oriented on dealing with energy poverty, but completely disregarding the overall factors on poverty per se. And that we'll still be in this kind of debates that poor people are poor people because they don't put enough effort in their life. But then we'll deal with like energy efficiency stuff, kind of speaking about electric bills and so on. Do you see that there is a potential of energy poverty to move beyond just the focus on energy markets and to move towards those that are doing research concerning market problems and labor in late capitalism towards some other elements of poverty per se. I'm sorry for being too long.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, and I feel, yeah, my feeling is that there are few energy poverty researchers that come from a more general sort of poverty research background, and that's a bit of an issue. You made me think that we are not talking enough about income as a driving factor, and anything and all the factors that underpin low incomes in general, and in unequal distribution of income. Precisely because it's a non-energy sort of factor, the energy poverty research does not deal very much with that. And this is in conflict with the everyday life experience of those that are in energy poverty. Because if you ask them, the first thing they may ask is, my income is 400 euros per month. So, and of course, then my energy bill is 70 euros per month, and that's problematic. But the main issue is there. And I agree. There is, I think we need to do an effort in reconnecting energy poverty research and policy with more anti-poverty sort of, and general monetary poverty and more general poverty sort of debates. This is, I think you have a very valid point there. What I've seen in the Spanish experience is there are some actors, and what I'm saying here is the energy utilities, they are very interested in doing quite the opposite. Like, okay, poverty is a very, it's a sort of structural large-scale issue. We cannot do anything about low incomes. This has to do with job market, whatever, how the distribution of income distribution in the country. So do not tell us about energy poverty. We talk about poverty in general, and it's kind of a strategic way of protecting themselves from all sorts of issues, and there are many, about how they charge low-income people, vulnerable people in general, prices that are well beyond, I mean, very high prices for what they could pay. So from my kind of own experience is that we need to highlight energy poverty as something distinct, because otherwise energy utilities will not, they will refuse to speak about issues related to the energy market.
Thank you. We have like time for just one more question. Okay. Nobody has a question at this point. So thank you, Sergio, again for the presentation and for taking the time to share it with us. And I wish you to have a pleasant rest of the day.
Well, thank you, Milenka, and thank you all for the invitation and for your attention. I hope you have a very good rest of the meeting.
Yeah, thank you.